The rooftop was quiet except for the hum of the city below. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. A group of young interns stood in a loose circle, some chatting nervously, others checking their phones. At the center of it all stood a tall man in a navy blue suit, polished shoes gleaming under the rooftop lights. His name was Jalen Madu, the 30-year-old CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. He smiled politely at the group, then raised his hand to signal the start of his talk. The interns fell silent. "Everyone wants to hear about success," he said. "About growth, about winning. But I want to start with something else." He took a slow breath and looked out over the edge of the building, down at the endless traffic, the blinking lights, the lives moving forward. Then he turned back to the interns, and for a moment, his confident expression softened. 16, he said quietly. Cold night. No home. No hope. That was me. There was a pause. No one moved. I didn't grow up in a boardroom. I didn't come from money. I came from a broken apartment, from eviction notices, from hunger. I was just a scared kid with no place to go. And if I hadn't found a reason to keep going, I wouldn't be standing here. He let the words settle in the air. His voice was calm, not dramatic, but behind it was weight. Real memory. Real pain. This isn't just a story about how I made it. It's a story about how close I came to giving up, and why I didn't. Then he looked each of them in the eye, not like a boss, but like someone trying to hand them something more valuable than a job offer. This could be your story too, he said. Not the beginning, but the fight. The reason. The climb. And with that, the story begins. At 16, Jalen Madu's world was already falling apart. He lived with his mother in a small, crumbling apartment on the east side of the city. The wallpaper peeled like old bandages, the sink leaked constantly, and the hallway light outside their door hadn't worked in months. Still, it was home. And as long as his mother smiled and cooked something warm, even if it was just rice and canned beans, Jalen felt safe. But that safety vanished the day she came home with her shoulders slumped and her hands shaking. She had lost her job at the diner. Business was slow, tips were down, and they were letting people go. Bills began to pile up faster than either of them could face. The fridge emptied. The landlord stopped being polite. Then came the knock on the door, a notice pinned to the wall, giving them 3 days to leave. They tried to stay with neighbors, but no one had space. His mother packed a small bag and told Jalen to wait at the corner cafe. She said she'd go ask for help, maybe from a cousin, maybe from a shelter. I'll be back before sunset, she promised. But sunset came and went, and she never returned. For the first few hours, Jalen sat in that cafe, sipping water and watching the door. Then he wandered outside, sat on the steps, and waited some more. He tried searching around and asking people if they had seen any woman that resembles his mother's description, but no one did. By midnight, he was walking the streets, clutching his backpack and trying not to look like a lost child. But he was completely lost. He ended up at the central bus station, where the benches were cold and the lights never turned off. He curled up near the vending machines and tried to sleep, using his hoodie as a pillow. Every sound made him jump, the buzz of the intercom, the echo of footsteps, the hiss of buses coming and going. In the morning, no one asked who he was. No one asked why a teenager with cracked lips and tired eyes was sleeping on a bench. That was the first thing he learned about being homeless. People don't see you. Not really. He scavenged what he could, half a granola bar from a trash can, a bottle of water someone left behind. The hunger clawed at his stomach, but the fear was worse. There were moments he thought about going to the police, to child services, but something told him they might not help. Or worse, they might separate him from what little freedom he had left. "I learned how to survive on a granola bar and pride," Jalen would later say, "but both run out eventually." And that's when his real journey began, not toward success, but toward survival. Jalen had been on the streets for less than a week when he met Mr. Eddie. It happened one early morning at the edge of a city park. Jalen was sitting on a bench, head down, trying to make a stale granola bar last longer than it should. A rough voice called out, "You sleep with your shoes off, someone'll steal 'em." Jalen looked up to see a wiry older man with a weather-beaten face, a gray beard, and a jacket patched more times than it was sewn. He carried a bag full of crushed cans and had the eyes of someone who'd seen everything and survived it. Mr. Eddie didn't ask many questions. He just sat down and started talking, like he already knew the boy's story. Over time, he became something of a teacher, gruff, unpredictable, but protective. He showed Jalen which shelters were safe and which ones to avoid. He taught him how to sleep sitting up, how to spot kindness in a stranger, and how to disappear when things got dangerous. "This street don't care who you are," Eddie said one night. "So you better learn how to care for yourself." Jalen listened. He watched. He learned. Eventually, he started helping people with small things, carrying groceries for busy shoppers, offering cold water bottles during traffic jams, holding doors for strangers in exchange for a few coins. Every dollar he earned went to food or bus fare or socks. He kept everything else tucked in his backpack, wrapped in a plastic bag like treasure. One day, near the back of a closed-down bookstore, he found a beat-up spiral notebook sticking out of a trash bin. The pages were mostly blank. He wiped off the dirt and stuffed it in his hoodie. That notebook became his world. He wrote in it every chance he got, ideas for small hustles, thoughts he didn't want to lose, quotes he picked up from library books or overheard conversations. It didn't matter if he was writing by streetlight or the glow of a vending machine. He poured himself into those pages. "My body was tired," Jalen would later say, "but my mind was wide awake." It was the beginning of something he didn't fully understand yet, a spark of vision in the middle of struggle. And even though he had nothing, that notebook made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he was building something that no one could take away. The city library became Jalen's secret refuge. Each morning, after waking up stiff from a bench or sidewalk, he'd make his way to the massive glass building with its heavy wooden doors and warm yellow lighting. He'd wait until the guards weren't looking, then slip inside behind someone else. Once he was in, no one bothered him. To most people, he was just another quiet teenager with a hoodie pulled over his head and a backpack at his feet. But to Jalen, that library was everything. It was warm. It was safe. And more importantly, it was full of knowledge he'd never had access to before. He wandered through the shelves like they were treasure maps. At first, he didn't even know what he was looking for. He just grabbed anything with a bold title. Books on business, on how the mind works, on how people become successful. He couldn't pronounce half the words in the beginning, but he kept reading anyway. He sat near the back, away from the crowds, scribbling notes in his salvaged notebook. Some days he'd copy quotes word for word. Other times, he'd just write questions. How do I start a business? What is marketing? What makes people trust you? He didn't always understand the answers, but it didn't matter. Each sentence gave him something to hold on to. Eventually, a librarian started to notice him. Her name was Miss Claire. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver hair tucked into a low bun. She never pried. She never asked why he was there every day or why his clothes always looked the same. But once, during a rainy afternoon, she walked over quietly and placed a small cup of hot chocolate on his table. "No need to thank me," she said gently before walking away. That small gesture stayed with him for a long time. Not just because of the warmth, but because it was the first kindness he'd received without conditions. "I read books I didn't understand," Jalen would later say, "but they made me feel like I could belong somewhere. Someday." And for a boy who had lost everything, the idea of belonging, even in a quiet corner of a dusty library, was more valuable than gold. Jalen's hustle started with curiosity and a little desperation. He had overheard two students talking in the library about flipping things online. At first, he didn't understand. But after days of research on borrowed library computers, he pieced it together. People were buying used items cheap and reselling them at a profit online. It clicked. Maybe he couldn't get a job without an address or clean shoes, but he could do this. He began visiting thrift stores and flea markets, walking miles just to get there. With just over $30 saved from carrying groceries and collecting cans, he bought small, overlooked things: vintage t-shirts, old books, dusty camera lenses, anything he thought might be valuable to someone, somewhere. His eye for detail, sharpened by survival, helped him spot what others ignored. He borrowed computer time at the library and posted listings on resale websites. It was slow at first. No views, no messages. But Jalen didn't give up. He taught himself the basics of e-commerce: how to write better product descriptions, how to take clearer photos using a donated phone, how to respond to customers with respect and speed. Every night, he scribbled what he learned in his notebook like a student studying for the biggest test of his life. He called his store TrueGrit Finds. It wasn't much, a few scattered listings and a logo he hand-drew in a notebook, but it was real. It was his. Then one day, after refreshing the page for what felt like the 100th time, a notification popped up. One item sold. An old pair of retro sneakers. Bought for $3, sold for $29. Jalen stared at the screen in silence, not believing it at first. Someone, somewhere, had clicked buy. Someone had trusted him, his store, his words, his effort. That one sale changed everything. "A stranger clicked buy," Jalen would later say, "and I felt like I just got hired by life itself." He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. It was still small, still fragile. But for the first time since he'd been left at that cafe, Jalen felt the momentum shift. Hope had turned into action, and that action was beginning to pay off. For a while, things were looking up. Jalen had started storing his growing collection of thrifted goods in a small, low-cost storage locker on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a metal door and concrete walls, but it felt like progress. His online sales were steady. He was learning faster than ever, even experimenting with simple packaging and thank-you notes to boost reviews. The notebook that had once been filled with questions was now brimming with ideas. Then one rainy morning, everything unraveled. When he arrived at the storage facility to pack and ship a few items, he found the door to his unit cracked open. The lock had been cut. Inside, it was empty. Every item he'd collected, photographed, listed, and organized, gone. At first, he stood there frozen, staring at the bare concrete like he was looking at the scene of a crime. In a way, he was. Not just a theft of things, but of effort, of progress, of trust in the world. For the next few days, Jalen barely spoke. He stopped going to the library. He didn't eat much, didn't hustle, didn't read or write. The notebook stayed zipped inside his backpack. He wandered the streets like a shadow of himself, watching the city move around him while he stood still. All the progress he'd made had vanished in a night. And for a boy who had built everything from nothing, that kind of loss cut deep. But fate has strange timing. Late one night, He passed by the alley behind the old soup kitchen where he sometimes saw familiar faces. That's where he found Mr. Eddy, curled up in a blanket, coughing hard, his skin pale, his breath shallow. He looked far worse than usual. Without hesitating, Jalen ran for help. He flagged down a volunteer from the shelter across the street and stayed with Eddy until they arrived. When they took him inside, Jalen waited on the steps, even after they told him he could leave. He didn't. Later, walking back into the night air, something shifted in him. Helping him reminded me, Jalen would say, years later, I didn't start this just for me. He hadn't fought so hard just to make money. He had fought because survival had taught him empathy. Because he wanted to one day be the kind of person who could lift others, especially the ones the world ignored. His business was gone, but his reason wasn't. And sometimes, when everything is taken from you, that's when your real foundation starts to form. After the theft and the storm it left behind, Jalen knew he needed to start over, but this time, with stability. He took the first job he could get, washing dishes at a small, locally owned cafe downtown. The pay was low, the hours long, but the work was honest, and it came with two things he desperately needed: warm meals and a place to think. In the back corner of the cafe, during his short breaks, Jalen would sit alone with a cup of water and a napkin in front of him. While other staff scrolled their phones or chatted, he would sketch ideas, brand names, mock-up logos. One napkin might hold a product name, the next a doodle of a future storefront or an app design he imagined. It was how he stayed sane, dreaming in ink, one square of paper at a time. One afternoon, a woman sitting near the window noticed him. She had been watching quietly for days, sipping her tea and occasionally glancing over her glasses. That day, she finally approached. "You always draw business ideas?" she asked gently. Jalen blinked, unsure how to respond. He gave a cautious nod. She smiled and extended her hand. "Renee Lawson. I used to do branding and marketing before I retired." He hesitated, then shook her hand. Over the next few weeks, Ms. Lawson started showing up more often, sometimes with a laptop, other times with printouts. She offered to look at his online listings and asked if she could give a few tips. Jalen was skeptical at first. People didn't usually offer help without asking for something in return. But Renee never asked for a dime. She helped him choose a proper color palette for his logo. She taught him how to write product descriptions that connected emotionally with buyers. She introduced him to free tools for building a simple website and helped him rewrite his About page until it sounded like someone with a real story, not just a kid trying to sell things. She didn't invest money, Jalen would later say. She invested belief. And that belief, as it turned out, was more powerful than any loan or donation. For the first time, someone with experience looked at him, not as a charity case, not as a troubled teen, but as a future business owner, as someone worth developing. Jalen's world began to open again, not because the pain disappeared, but because someone had shown him what was possible when the right eyes see your potential. With Ms. Renee's help and the fire still burning in his chest, Jalen launched his new online store, TrueGrit Supplies. The name came straight from his notebook, 2 words he had scribbled months earlier when he'd first dared to imagine something bigger than survival. This time, the store wasn't just a page of listings. It had a logo, a story, a mission. He sold affordable, sustainable gear, things like reusable planners, minimalist backpacks, starter kits for creatives, and basic tools for aspiring entrepreneurs. Every item had a purpose, and every product page included a line from his own journey. It wasn't just a shop, it was a reflection of everything he had fought through. His pitch was simple: start where you are, with what you have. It was what he had done, and he believed others could too. To spread the word, Jalen turned to something new: social media. He used borrowed library Wi-Fi and second-hand phones to post short videos and photos on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. At first, they were rough, just clips of him packing orders, explaining his story, or giving tips to other hustlers trying to build something from nothing. But his authenticity hit home. People weren't just watching, they were connecting. Comments poured in. Strangers shared his videos with captions like, "This kid's got heart," and "He's living proof it's possible." Orders started coming in faster. His followers grew. He began shipping products out of the cafe after shifts, using the back counter as his workspace. The manager didn't mind. In fact, he offered to help carry boxes to the post office. Then, one morning, Jalen got a message that left him speechless. A local news blog wanted to feature his story. They had seen his videos. They were inspired. They wanted to know how a homeless teen had turned hardship into hustle. When the article went live, it spread fast. Customers doubled. Website visits spiked. Even his old librarian, Miss Claire, emailed him through his site to say she'd read the piece, and that she wasn't surprised. Jalen read every word of that article 3 times. Not out of pride, but disbelief. Not long ago, he was invisible. Now, people were looking and listening. He had started with trash-picked notebooks, thrifted shoes, and borrowed time. Now he had a brand, a business, and most importantly, a growing community of young dreamers who saw him not just as a seller, but as someone who understood. His brick wasn't made of stone or cement, but click by click, order by order, Jalen was building something that would last. By the time Jalen turned 28, his business had outgrown late-night packing shifts and cafe countertops. With savings carefully built over years of consistent hustle, he finally signed a lease on a small, sunlit office space above a laundromat. It wasn't glamorous, old carpet, creaky windows, but to him, it felt like a skyscraper. It was his. But Jalen wasn't interested in building alone. On his first day in the new space, he made 2 phone calls, to Troy and Shane, men he had once shared shelter floors and street meals with. They'd stuck by each other during the worst winters, and now he was offering them jobs. Not just as favors, but because he knew they had drive, loyalty, and grit. They became the first official team behind TrueGrit Supplies. Business was steady, but Jalen's vision had shifted. Selling products was no longer enough. He remembered the fear of not knowing where to start, the confusion in those first library searches, the loneliness of trying to figure it all out while hungry and exhausted. He wanted to build something that gave people more than tools. He wanted to give them knowledge. So, he did what most people assumed only tech professionals could do. He built an app. With the help of volunteers and online tutorials, Jalen launched an easy-to-use mobile platform that connected struggling youth with free entrepreneurial courses, videos, and community support. Whether someone wanted to start a food stand, a clothing brand, or just understand how budgeting worked, the app offered them a place to begin. It was called Grit Link. Soon after, schools began inviting him to speak. The same boy who had once ducked past security guards to sneak into warm libraries now stood on auditorium stages, telling classrooms full of teenagers about survival, mistakes, and mindset. He didn't sugarcoat his story. He told them about sleeping on bus benches, about losing everything more than once, about the days he almost gave up. And always, he ended with the same line: "Being broke isn't the same as being broken." That sentence stuck. Kids repeated it. Teachers printed it. Some even wrote it on their whiteboards. Because it wasn't just a line, it was a permission slip. A reminder that their circumstances didn't define their future. Jalen's company was growing. His platform was reaching new people every day. But most importantly, His story had become something far more powerful than a brand. It had become a bridge. At 30 years old, Jalen Madu was officially what the world called a success. His company, TrueGrit Supplies, had crossed a $10 million valuation. Investors were finally taking notice of the brand that had once started with second-hand sneakers and napkin logos. He was invited to speak at national tech conferences, sitting on panels beside CEOs who had inherited office buildings while he had once prayed for clean socks. But Jalen never let the numbers define him. They were just tools, milestones on a much longer road. While cameras followed him backstage and articles praised his unorthodox rise, Jalen kept his routines grounded. Once a month, without fail, he visited the same shelter where he'd once curled up beside Mr. Eddie. He never arrived with a film crew. Just quiet donations, new sleeping bags, laptops, hygiene kits. Sometimes he brought pizza. Other times, just time. He sat. He listened. He remembered. In classrooms, he shared stories with teenagers who were one crisis away from the streets. In interviews, he always redirected attention to the people who had helped him, the librarian who gave him warmth, the cafe owner who gave him shifts, the woman who taught him branding over tea. "I didn't get here alone," he'd say. "And I won't stay here alone either." In his new office, now sleek, minimalist, and buzzing with quiet energy, there was only one photo on his wall. It wasn't of him shaking hands with an investor. Not the news article. Not even the app's first million downloads. It was a faded picture, tucked inside a clean black frame. A 16-year-old boy, in a damp hoodie, clutching a soggy notebook. Eyes tired. Face unsure. But in that expression was the first flicker of fight, the beginning of everything. Underneath the photo was a quote in silver ink. That boy didn't know how, but he knew why. For Jalen, that why had always been bigger than himself. And no matter how high he climbed, he made sure that every step left space behind him, for someone else to follow. What happened to his mother? Nobody knows. The puzzle is yet to be solved. He reported his mother missing years ago. Still, police hasn't found her. Once in a while Jalen check up on the case. Sometimes, he wonders if she is still alive or dead. He would silently weep wishing she was around to see her only son who overcame adversity to become successful. The rooftop was quieter now. The interns stood in a small semicircle, their phones lowered, their faces thoughtful. The sky behind Jalen was painted in soft streaks of gold and violet, the kind of sunset that made even a city hold its breath. Jalen took one last look at the young people in front of him. Some were only a few years younger than he had been when he had nothing but a notebook and cold concrete beneath him. They looked at him with wide eyes, waiting for advice, for answers, for something real. "You don't need money to start," he said. His voice was steady but gentle, like he was sharing a secret. "You need a reason that won't let you sleep." He paused, letting the words sink in. "People will doubt you. Life will test you. But if you hold on to that reason, if you build from it, then nothing can stop you." The wind picked up slightly, tugging at his jacket. He smiled faintly and looked out over the city one more time. "And when you rise, bring others with you." The group stayed silent. It wasn't the kind of speech you clapped for. It was the kind you carried. As the interns filed back inside, Jalen stayed on the rooftop. He pulled off his suit jacket and folded it over one arm. In his other hand, he held something familiar, an old, weathered hoodie. The very one he'd worn as a teenager, back when survival was the only plan he had. He stood between the past and the future, between memory and momentum. As the last light of the day touched the buildings below, he breathed in the cool air, calm and certain. Some people climb ladders. Others build them. Jalen had done both. The screen fades to black. A soft piano melody begins to play as the credits roll. Quiet, simple, and steady, just like the journey that started with a boy in a notebook and turned into something much bigger. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.